In this video, we are going to introduce contract tests by using PACT. Now, before we get started, a few words about PACT. PACT is a rather simple library, but very powerful because it allows us to write contracts between two different systems. If we consider mobile app being one system and a backend being another one, they usually communicate by utilizing RESTful services. Now, one problem that may occur over time is that if the backend changes something in the data structure that comes over in the JSON, then the mobile application may fail. So on the mobile side, by using PACT, we can write a JUnit test that will generate a contract about our expectations from the API. It will come in form of a JSON, it will get generated, and then in this JSON, we are going to describe what particular API call expects back as a JSON representation. And then this contract, this JSON file, will be shared with the backend, and then the backend will utilize this file to write that side of the tests to make sure that the response that they are sending towards the client is according to the expectations. Now let's quickly take a look into the documentation, and as we can see here, there are two sides of the tests. One is the consumer, which is our mobile application, and the other one is the provider. So on the mobile application, we are writing JUnit test. It will generate a file that here is represented as a contract, and then the backend will utilize this contract to also write tests to make sure that the JSON representation that they are sending over is correct. So let's see how it is going to work on Android. Here I have the PACT docs and I need JVM. Important to mention here is that this works pretty fine with Kotlin multi-platform because these are tests and we can write them in the Android source and it works like a charm, so no issues at all. Here is the dependency that we need. So I'm going to take this one and back to my code. This is our pretty well-known repository that we're using for coaching purposes inside our Android dev community, and I'm going to introduce the tests here. So first I'm going to open my version catalog, and here in the unit testing I'm going to add PACT. And now let me define this PACT as additional library here. And now that I have defined PACT and I am adding that in my unit testing bundle, everywhere where I'm using the unit testing, I'm going to have PACT. It's important here to pay attention that this is the consumer, and if I go back to the documentation, I need to have this consumer because the mobile is considered the consumer. If you go back here, the mobile side is the consumer, the provider is the backend. Okay, now I have this, and then I can start writing tests. Now here, because I have modularized setup, the network is the place that makes most sense to write these contract tests because the networking is the boundary that talks to my backend, right? So here I'm going to create a new package. I'm going to call this out, and here I'm going to write my contract test for authorization. I do have an out service already, and we have these two endpoints, sign up and out login. And let's start by introducing contract tests for the out login and this out response basically. So here I'm going to create a new test, new file, and I'm going to call this login contract test. So the first thing that I need to do here is I have to annotate this class with PACT consumer test. This is important annotation. If you're familiar with JUnit 5, we have this extend with annotation, and this is just a wrapper for that. So I can also write it in that way. So I can say add extend and then put the PACT extension there, but this is already like built in for me, so I don't have to. Now there are two aspects that are very important when we are approaching writing these tests. So we have to define the PACT, like what's going to be the relationship between the request and the response, or with other words, for which request we are going to return which response. And that's going to be one function, and then the other one would be the actual test that will make the call with the given JSON and expect particular JSON in return. So let's see how that's going to be done. So here I'm going to create a function. I'll call this create PACT. And this function has to be annotated with PACT instead of test. So here, this is different form of test. We have to annotate it with PACT. And here we have to supply two important things. So what's going to be the provider name and what's going to be the consumer name. So these are important because on the other side, they're also going to match against these two things. And in that sense, it is important to have them correct. That's part of the contract as well. As a provider, we are going to say maybe API provider, or backend can be, whatever you feel like naming it. Then the consumer can be, let's say, our mobile app. It's important here that this function will return v4 PACT, and it will take in builder. By using this builder now, we can define what's going to be the request and what's going to be the response that comes back. So we can return here the builder, and then we can say upon receiving, and then this is just a simple description, which call we are talking about. Maybe it's going to be useful. So we can say the login call, and then I have to define the path. So for the case of the login, I have the out/login. So let me take that. And here I'm going to paste it. So it will be /out/login. So that's going to be the path. I also have to specify the method. So this method is post. And additionally, I can add here many other things that need to match for that particular call, for example. So I can be really picky and granular. So for the sake of showcasing here, we are going to add one matching header for the accept, and that's going to be an application JSON. And then since this is a post, we also have to specify what's going to be the body. Now the body can be lambda. This allows us to build the body in a form of JSON, but we can also call a function, and then here we can supply the JSON as a string. If we take a look here, the body has lots of overloads, so we have lots of options, and just regular string is gonna do as well. So here the body for the login can be as simple as, if you go back to the service, the login data is email and password. So here we can hard code for now, we can improve that later. That would be the body. So now we have defined the actual post call for the login. So it has to be post, it has to have accept application JSON, and it will be on this path with this body. So when that happens here, we can say will respond with, and now again we can build a response as expectation, right? So here we can say also matching header, we can say content type, let's say in the reply, so that the backend will have to send us content type application JSON, for example. Then the body that we are expecting back again can be string. We can deal with this a little bit later. We can also say that the status code must match 200, for example. And finally, we have to say to PACT. And as you can see, there are two overloads here. And because we are returning back v4 PACT, here we will say v4 PACT class.java. And now that I have this complete, let me also put here what's going to be the expected body that I get back. So if I look back to my out service, the out response is token and then some user data that has ID, email, and about. So that's going to be the response that I'm expecting back. So far, so good. So this is not the best way to describe this. I'm just hard coding stuff here. This is not very scalable. We are going to see how to improve this. But let's first proceed with building this test so that we can see what are the requirements to make this test working. So here, now that I have the PACT, now I can approach writing a test. So now I am going to annotate this new function with a test. And then I have to annotate it with one more annotation. And that one is PACT test 4. And here in the PACT test 4, I have to define for which provider is this test going to be. Now, of course, there are different approaches, different ways. I can also maybe say PACT method and then define value, but that's not very necessary in this case. Now, this is going to be a function again that I can name whatever I feel like. So for example, perform login call. This one is going to take in mock server and won't return anything. Now, if you remember the contract test that we were writing with mock web server, this is pretty much similar, but this is next level because it is abstracted away for us. And now we are having access to the mock web server and then we can utilize it to make calls. So here I'm going to say the HTTP response is going to be a request. And then this is going to be a post call. So here I'm going to take the mock server get URL plus the URL that I'm trying to reach out, which is /auth/login. So that's going to be my post. And then I have to also apply the expected headers. And then I'm going to apply body as well. And then here again, I have lots of forms, but I'm going to use the body string. And then here again, I'm going to hard code this body just to make the test pass first. Then I'm going to refactor later. And I'm going to hard code this one because that's expected. Here I said that this is the expectation. So I'm going to send it now in the test. I also have to supply here content type, application JSON, and then I'll just execute this. I'm getting back HTTP response and I can extract the content out of it. And then this content type I can say as string. And then this as string is basically the JSON that comes back. And that means that I can try to serialize this by using the type that I'm using here. That will verify that the serialization also works properly. So I can say auth response here is going to be JSON decode from string. And here I'm expecting the auth response and I'll pass down the content. And this will verify that I can parse whatever content that comes back from the backend can be serialized to auth response. So this line is very important. And then I can also make additional assertions. I can say assert that my auth response is not null, and that should work. Now I have my test ready, so I can go ahead and run this. So let's see what happens. The test is working. Now what happened actually after this execution of the test, if I open the build folder here, it generates this PACT folder. And now if I open this, it says mobile app-API provider. So here, these things that we have supplied as consumer and provider, it's going to utilize them to create this JSON. And if I open this JSON, it does describe what's going to be the expectations that I am having as a client from the backend. So if you analyze this, it says that there will be a login call that has a request with body, certain body, and content type, certain content type. And then it needs to have a header application JSON. Then there are some matching rules and whatnot. And then it also says that this is a post on this path. And then the expected response would be token and user data. So this is what the backend has to send back to me. Now, of course, I could be a bit more flexible because now here it expects token with exact value or email and about with exact value. And this is not necessarily a problem because we are trying to test the contract and the actual values don't really matter that much. So having them hard-coded like this is okay. But also we are pretty flexible to say, okay, I'm expecting string type and the value doesn't really matter. or if it's a link, we can make a matcher, we can match with regex. So it's very powerful, very, very cool. Now, this is awesome. So it describes the contract, and what can happen is that, like, during my CI/CD, for example, I can submit this file to some place that then the backend can load from that place, these files, and it can utilize those files to run the tests against to verify if the responses that they are sending are compliant to our expectations. That's super powerful. Now back to our tests. As I said, this is not the best way to describe the JSON because this is pretty fragile and we can make little mistake like missing something somewhere and it's gonna fail. It would be better to build this JSON by using different APIs, and those APIs are also part of the library. So let's take a look what we can do. So for the body here, for example, we can define a private value where we are gonna describe the JSON. And this is gonna be a new JSON body, which is essentially a builder that allows us to build some JSON. So here I can say body.string type, and this is what I tried to explain. So if I just say string type and put here the name, let's say email, it says that there will be an email, but the actual value doesn't really matter. But for this situation, I am going to apply a concrete value, which I have here to proceed with this particular example. And then next to the email, I have to say body.string type. And as you can see here, we have string type, string value, string matcher. We can use regex. We can do pretty much a lot of different things. So here it would be password, and I'm gonna again take the value that I was submitting before. And then here I'm just gonna say build. Now I can take this login data JSON, and here instead of this body, I can use that value. And next I can do the same for the response body as well. And now that I have the out response JSON, I'm gonna take this and also apply it here as well. And this should keep the test working, but this is way less fragile now, right? And additionally, to improve this even further, what I can do instead of hard coding this JSON here, what I can do is I can define login data, which is a login data type that I already have. As an email, I'm going to supply the same email that I had. And as a password, again, I'm gonna take this value. And then here, instead of submitting the string, I can say JSON encode to string and then pass this login data. And that should keep the test working. And then to reduce the duplication between the values, I'm going to move this value on top, and then I'm gonna read the actual values from it. Login data email and login data password. Now let's run once again just to make sure it works and we are not breaking anything. Now the last thing that I would like to say here is pay attention how fast these tests are. And to bring the point even further, I have also created here sign up contract test off camera. And then let's take a look what we've got here. We have again out data, but this one is for the sign up, and expected out response as well. And then here for the PACT, again, I'm having a path to /sign up. This is a sign up call. If you take a look in the service, it is /sign up. And then I have again matching header, body, create sign up body. And then with the response, I'm gonna have the same header expectation and response here that are functions inside. So let's take a look. This is a function instead of a value that describes what's going to be the response and what's going to be the payload then that I'm sending to the backend. This is create sign up body. So these functions are used accordingly here in the PACT, create sign up and create out response. So in this test, I'm showing off that we can also create functions. It doesn't have to be values as well. And then here, this test, what it does the same thing, makes a call, a post call, then submits the out data as a JSON, and then it tries to parse out the response that comes from the backend and converts that to out response. And then here I can actually assert on the entire objects, whether that thing that comes from the backend and that I have deserialized is the exact same thing that I'm having here, which is an out response with particular values. So I can match equality that way too. And now I'm going to run both of these tests now, or actually I'm gonna run all, just to make a point that these are running super fast, like blazing fast. And then this one here, this file that was generated, it just gets extended. So both of the calls that I have defined are gonna be here. So interactions, it is an array, login call that we saw before. And if I collapse it, it has then the sign up call that also defines everything that is the expectation. And then, as I said, we can submit this file somewhere, and then the other side, the provider or the backend, can utilize that contract, which is this file, and then it can run the tests against this contract to verify that the response that is coming back is according to the expectation. If you want similar exercises, challenges, and getting your questions answered, find a link below this video and consider joining our Android Devs community. I'll see you inside.